it's not just whether people can speak the right language or not. It's where they come from culturally too. Even small differences can make it quite difficult for people to form, tight bonds. So in a lot of factories, and people write to me all the time. I never get back to any of them because so much of it comes in, but I do try to read everything to get a sort of little, overview of how people are feeling. And in factories, you've got Mexicans who are mad at blacks because they want an extra day off. The Mexicans want an extra day off for Easter or Christmas, and they don't see why MLK Day is a thing. And when and when they watch on television, it's like, well, you guys don't even like Martin Luther King. You're all back on the skin color stuff again. So why can't I have an extra day off for Easter? So even little things like that cause tension in the workplace, to the point of people leaving their jobs and having like physical altercations sometimes because children are involved in family. So it doesn't have to be completely alien, but they do seem to want to throw alien cultures together, perhaps because the more confused and different people are, the easier they are as a group to marshal in the right direction.
This happened in Philadelphia and all these cities. It was basically the Ford Foundation would recruit ministers to bring blacks up from the South and flow them into ethnic neighborhoods. And so what happened in places like Philadelphia is ethnic cleansing. I'm the first guy who ever said it was ethnic cleansing. It was white flight before I started putting my categories on this thing. So you had a parish, Most Blessed Sacrament Parish in Philadelphia, 8 blocks by 8 blocks, but densely populated because of the row house. They had enough power to elect their own state senator. And that state senator went to Harrisburg, the state capital, and represented their interests. And their interests said the government should not get involved in distributing contraceptives. We're talking about 1964. This man was the most hated man in the state of Pennsylvania. And so how did they deal with that? How did the oligarchs deal with that? They flooded blacks into that neighborhood. Crime was rampant, and they drove the Irish out. And the result was that this man no longer had a job. That was the point of this forced migration that was way ahead of what is happening in Europe. It happened in America. That was the point of it.
Right. You've written a very large book, Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and it makes the case that there is a sort of, albeit in a diaspora, a kind of national character to the worldwide Jewish nation, whatever the Jewish equivalent of the Ummah is. I would argue perhaps Catholics share the same kind of devil's advocacy, dissident sort of spirit, which might be why the Supreme Court is Jews and Catholics. It's difficult to argue, isn't it, looking at history? Well, of course you would say, so you wrote the book, but audience, isn't it? That there does seem to be something in the Jewish character culturally that enjoys deconstruction and pulling things apart and twisting them around, and sometimes there isn't very much left at the end of it. I know that you have written a lot and thought a lot and spoken a lot about who's doing it. Let's grant you that for a second. There's just 2 things I want to ask about. First of all, do you recognize a difference between the Reform liberal Jews, the people who have precious metals in their surname that you'll see bylines in newspapers, and Orthodox Jews who seem by and large to want to be left alone and seem by and large to be much more culturally conservative? I would go as far as to say I've never met a liberal Jew I like, and I've never met an Orthodox Jew I don't, which is maybe overstating the case, but not by much. Do you recognize quite a big distinction between those 2 groups?
Sure, there's a distinction. The basic issue is in my book. By the way, the 2nd edition is now out.
Thank you.
They're available at culturewars.com or fidelitypress.org. But basically, I said this already. I was in Mashhad conference sponsored by the Iranians, and there was Rabbi David Weiss there. And I said, look, he's a Neturei Karta, that he thinks that Zionism is an abomination. It's against Jewish principles. I said, if all the Jews were like this guy, we wouldn't have a problem. But the problem is that's not the case, because other groups of Jews have taken this Jewish revolutionary spirit, which came about when they rejected Christ and where they rejected the Logos and rejected the Logos of social order, and they determined that that was their identity. So that is the birth of this Jewish revolutionary spirit, which is never comfortable with a status quo. Wherever they go, they have to agitate for some type of change. And the problem of in Europe was recognized early on, when the church finally succeeded the Roman Empire and had to be the principle of order. And they came up with a solution to the problem, which was called Sicut Judaeus Non, which is basically no one has the right to harm the Jew, but secondly, the Jew doesn't have a right to destroy your culture. Now, how do you prevent the Jew from destroying your culture? Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. And you're going to have to come up, but you have to do this because that's what they will do. And all you have to do is look at what happened to the United States of America or France, country like that. I could give you other examples as well. If you allow them some type of institution that has a dominance, like Hollywood, they will use this to undermine the moral order. And unless they're stopped, and the Catholic Church was successful in stopping Hollywood for 31 years, but then the Catholic Church lost its nerve after Vatican II, and the result was the total dominance of the information sphere by this group of people, and using that to leverage their destruction of the social order. It's that simple. That's the situation we're in right now, and no one can address the problem.
We've got two interrelated things, I suppose, to talk about, and I would love to get more into this with you, perhaps when we're in person, because I think it's an easier way to have a conversation. Perhaps we could do something longer on this subject when we're together. I see sort of two related problems. One of them may fix itself and may not. I mean, the US support for Israel and all of Israel's objectives, is it not primarily because it serves the US just as much as it serves Israel? And what I mean specifically is not the people of America, but the people who run America. I mean, the international relief, that goes to Israel and other countries in the form of effectively gift certificates to be spent back in America in the weapons business, for instance, right? Isn't most of the reason why the US is so concerned with aid to Israel and that country's future in particular, that it's good business for the people who run America? It's as much America's fault as it is anybody in Israel agitating or militating for that. Is it not true?
I think there was a time when people were making this argument, but I think after Walton Mearsheimer did their book on the Israel lobby, it became obvious that Israel was benefiting from this relation much more than the United States of America in any way. I'm saying in any way. So obviously there are people who sell weapons and stuff like that, but I mean, I don't see, let's say the Iraq war. How did America benefit from that at all? That was all the result of a neoconservative takeover of the Bush administration. They plotted it. They carried it out. And how did America in any way benefit from that? Maybe those contractors that gouged the government in all that privatized aid to Iraq, maybe they did. Maybe the Dick Cheneys of the world benefited financially from that. But at this point, it seems to me that the negatives far outweigh any type of positive. And that's just for that group of people. When it comes to the American people in general, no, we don't benefit at all from this. Yeah. They get millions of dollars a day, and there are people who are descending into poverty all across America. Someone's got to be able to discuss this. When it comes down to actual instances, like Benjamin Netanyahu shows up, and the United States Congress, the most powerful men in the world, supposedly, have to give 26 standing ovations to this guy. Why did they do that? Yeah. Well, the New York Times said afterwards, it's because IPAC was there taking roll. And if you didn't jump up and clap as if this guy were Demosthenes come back from the grave,
And he's
they would campaign against you in the next election. Now that is a total control over our Congress, proving that they represent those people and they don't represent the people of the United States of America.
I think that there's I think it's a powerful case. I suppose my question would be, when you see the Orthodox, I don't too much care about bleating about anti-Semitism. I mean, for one thing, I'm a Catholic. I'm not that invested in the subject of anti-Semitism. It kind of doesn't really doesn't upset me very much, frankly, because 99.9% of the allegations is just noise, and it doesn't bother me too much. I mean, if right-wing fascism were to descend on America, it wouldn't the fate of secular liberal Jews wouldn't keep me up at night. But almost everybody I've met in the Orthodox is a little different. Do you take seriously and do you credit those Orthodox rabbis who, for instance, disavowed the ADL recently, and Greenblatt in particular? I know that it was couched in terms of like, this doesn't help Jews, so it wasn't exactly a sort of selfless thing like you're lying about white people, but they don't typically say anything publicly about other Jews ever.
No, that's right.
And they especially well, that's kind of the point, really. The Orthodox don't really interact with the outside world very much at all, and they especially don't do it to criticize other Jews. Did you take that seriously and see it as a good sign, or was it just
I took it as a sign that the ADL has way overplayed its hand.
Yeah.
They are making Jews odious in the eyes of the population at large.
I think
that's what's going on.
True. I think absolutely right.
Any Jew who is worried about his status here should be concerned about an organization like the ADL, which is completely out of control, attacking someone like Tucker Carlson. Or even more recently, Sean Hannity was attacked by the Jerusalem Post as an anti-Semite. This is, I mean, I've watched Sean Hannity lick the boots of Benjamin Netanyahu. It was not a pleasant experience, but to go when something like
anti-Semite is kind of crazy.
When something like this happens, I think it means that we're in the grip of a moral panic. Yeah. So it's like the Salem witch trial. You know, anybody can be accused of being a witch now. Even the minister's wife can be accused. Anybody can be accused of an anti-Semite. And this is not going to, I mean, in many ways, it's like the cunning of reason. You're going to cry wolf too many times.
It's offensive to authors who have the real credentials, you know?
Well, I think that Jews should rightly be concerned about this. We went through this in St. Louis when there was basically a Jewish attempt to tear down the statue of St. Louis there, and one Jew called a friend of mine and said, "This is terrible. That lady rabbi, nobody takes her seriously. She's a witch. Blah blah blah." So he got back to the friend and said, "Look, I think you're right. We as citizens of St. Louis should take a stand against that." Well, he backed off at that point. Yeah, because that's more typical behavior, because he doesn't want to be critical of other Jews. But then that brings up another question: to what extent are Jews citizens? And that brings up the question of Jonathan Pollard, for example, shows up gets pardoned by Trump, one of the biggest spy in American history. The entire defense establishment wanted him to stay in prison forever, and yet Donald Trump bucks that, pardons the guy. The guy, Sheldon Adelson, sends his plane. He flies over to Israel. There's Benjamin Netanyahu at the bottom of the stairway welcoming him. And then the next thing he does is he gives an interview and he says, Jews all have dual loyalty, and they should have dual loyalty.
I think Jews, with any sense, will have been a shiver will have gone down their spine when they heard him say that in public. This show is not a debate show. We just have conversations. So I let people kind of speak for themselves and let the